All right, so this is my second try at this video. Piggybacking off of my prior video, learning all the notes on the fretboard. I only showed, the power chord shape for the E and A strings when you string skip. That's how you find your same note. So because this is a D, we know that's a D, we know that's a D, right? String skipping from the A string to the G string, that's a D. That's how you find your same note. And if we're on the E string, you're string skipping to the D string, and this is an A, right? That makes sense. That makes complete sense. If you're doing the power chord with the A5 plus an octave, that's how you know what this note is. Okay, that's how to help you learn. Now, if you're trying to see what notes there are on beyond the G string, so if you're on the A string, that's a D, and on your G string you string skip to G, that's also a D. But if you are on the D string here and you play a G, how do you find that note on the B string? You add a half step, so that's your G. And it's the same thing on the G string. If you want to string skip to the high E string, you should already know what the note is on the high E string. Right? That's your C right there, because you know the top and you know the A string, so you should know that. But in case you don't, it's just adding a half step. So on the G string, we're string skipping from C to the E string to a C. Okay, that's the first thing. That kind of completes my prior video of learning all the notes on the fretboard and just being mindful of that. Okay, so the second part of this video, I'm just going to talk really briefly about relative minors and majors, because, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows the basic ones, you know, the E minor, right? E minor, same thing as G major. Same thing with A minor and C major. So if you're an E minor or A minor pentatonic, that's a C, right? That's your A, that's your root, right? So I'm coming into this assuming you already know about relative minors and majors. But the reason why it's important to know all the note names is because a lot of times your relative minor or your relative major is going to be a sharp or flat. That's just the way it works out. The only key in words there's no sharps or flats is C major, right? And then you can, you know, there's no sharps or flats. Every other key there's sharps or flats. So let's say you have a what they call a vamp. A vamp is basically just one chord played over and over, right? Say you're trying to play G, right? You can always default to the E minor pentatonic. Something like that, right? Sounds okay, it sounds mellow, but if you want it to sound more mean and aggressive, you can play the G minor pen. It sounds better, it sounds more bluesy, it sounds more mean and aggressive. That's because the blues is meant to, I mean, it breaks the rules, but, you know, you're playing a major chord or bar chord, and then so that's a really easy way to find your key in the blues. When you do like a vamp here, your E minor or your E major caged bar shape, it's the same shape as your pentatonic first position, right? It sounds fine because our ears are used to that. Our ear is used to that, right? The problem is, if you're playing C minor pentatonic, what is your relative major? It's this note here. And from our fret identifying exercise, we know this is an A sharp. So A sharp major is the relative of G minor. Same thing if you want to do a C vamp. You can default to A, right? Or you can play it like, that sounds a lot more mean and aggressive, but, right? That's a D sharp. Your relative minor for that, if you're in C, right? This is the C caged bar chord, right? Your relative minor is always going to be on the G string, right? And in this case, it is a D sharp, right? A lot of times you want to play, you know, E minor, for example, right? And instead of doing the bluesy, you want to do an actual E major. E major. You want to do an actual E major pentatonic, and so you would be in this key. Right, and so what is that key? So we know this is E, and so to identify our relative minor, we just go this string right here, or we can, right, it's just this string right here, and that is a C sharp. Sorry. Song example would be, right, that's just a song example. Okay, the last thing I want to cover is some very, very elementary music theory. So one thing I covered last video in terms of music theory is, and it's a lot easier to visualize this on a keyboard or on a piano with 88 keys or whatever, but is you'll notice there's 7-note names, there's only 12 notes per octave, meaning there's no sharps, or there's no semitones between a B and a C, a B and a C, and your second counter is an E to an F, right? So the reason why it's important to know the intervals, it's just as important to know the note names, but it's also, I think, more important in the beginning, before you have everything memorized. Like, it took me years to memorize all the note names, but before that, you definitely should learn what an interval is. So the smallest interval is a semitone or a half step, right? Right, if you do this, it's a chromatic walk. If you ever heard the term chromatic, it just means increasing by half steps or decreasing by half steps. Okay, so we know from the guitar neck, it's got 12 frets, and then it repeats, right? So I'm going to start talking about interval names, and this is sort of like the backbone for creating chords and creating your major, minor, diatonic scales. This is the backbone. One thing to note is we're not talking about chord progressions. So when I say a 1 or a 2 or a 3, I'm not referring to, a specific chord. When we're doing intervals, we start with 0, okay? We start with 0 because 12 would be the octave. So we're not going to count the same note twice. So this open E is a 0, and this is the octave. If you want to be fancy, you can call this the root, home, or unison, whatever. But it's good to know every single interval name. Okay, so E, your first one is a minor second. Your second half step, your second is a major second. Your third is a minor third. And again, the minor third is really important because it resolves into the major, right? And then a lot of rock and roll is based, right? Anyway, okay, so again, this is your root or home. This is your minor second, right? Your 2 is going to be a major second. Your 3 is going to be a minor third. Your 4 is going to be a major third. Your 5 is going to be a perfect fourth. Okay, we call it a perfect fourth because it really it complements the other way around. As you'll see, like this, we're on fret 5, so the guitar is tuned by perfect fourths, except for the G string, but we don't need to get into all that. So your 5 is a perfect fourth. Your 6 is a augmented fourth or diminished fifth. Now, I'll cover what a diminished chord is, but it's basically a half step below your perfect fifth, right? So your 5 is going to be a perfect fourth. Your fifth is going to be a perfect fourth. Your 6 is going to be augmented fourth or a diminished fifth. Your 7th, and this is really important, is always going to be a perfect fifth. That's the basis of the power chord. Okay, the E5. We call it a perfect fifth. I don't know who came up with the name, but it's called a perfect fifth because it really complements the home root chord, and it's not at all dissonant. Whereas a diminished fifth is very dissonant. Okay, so this is a perfect fifth. This is a diminished. See how dissonant that sounds? All right, let's start again from the beginning. Your first interval, minor second. Your second interval, major second. Third interval, minor third. Fourth interval, major third. Fifth interval, perfect fourth. Sixth interval, diminished fifth or augmented fourth. Okay, your seventh interval, perfect fifth. Always perfect fifth. Your eighth interval, it's called a minor sixth. Your ninth interval, it's called a major sixth. Your 10th interval, it's called a minor seventh. Your 11th interval, it's called a major seventh. And your 12th fret is the octave. It's the same as the root, so we just call it the octave, because we started out at 0, right? And this is the entire fretboard. So whichever string you start on, when you're doing these chromatic walks, you're covering every single note that exists. Now, of course, there are like quarter bend, right? We're not counting all that. So every single half step, every semitone has a name. That's the point I'm trying to make. So, you know, if we're at the 10th fret, we know the interval is 10, we know that that's a minor seventh. If we make it to 11, that's called a major seventh, right? And that's how you get, like, you know, sevenths, ninths, 11th chords. It's basically stacking thirds, which I won't get into in this video. But now that we know what all the intervals are, we can stay with E and we can just do an E major chord, right? So this is your root, or your unison. This is your perfect fifth, right? We count 7. And this is your octave. And then the first fret of the G string is your major third. Right? Now, if we were to take that away, it would be a minor, E minor. So the only difference between a minor and major is, and you hear that in the blues all the time, like, right? So the point I'm trying to make is your major chord, every major chord that is a tritone, meaning no extra chords, it's going to consist of your root, perfect fifth, and your major third. Same thing with A major. Major third, right? But we do A minor, it's a minor third. It's only a half step difference, right? Right? It's really easy to visualize on the open E major. It's going from minor to major. Now, again, a diminished chord is basically, instead of a perfect fifth, you're using a diminished fifth, and it sounds very dissonant. So I'm just going to do a power chord. I'm not even going to do a whole chord, but that's what, you know, let's say an A diminished power chord sounds like. Right? It sounds very, very dissonant. But the reason why diminished chords are important is because they are part of the major and minor chord progressions when you actually do the formula, which I won't get into in this video. Again, this video is just covering interval names. Okay, so know those interval names, and then I assume you don't know the diatonic scale. The diatonic scale is the same as the pentatonic scale. It's just, you're just adding 2 notes per octave. So for A, or for C major, it's like, right? And it's the same for A minor. Right? So let's just go through like what the major chord is. Let's do E, right? Let's do E. That's your major scale on 1 E string, okay? So what your major is whole step, half step, whole step, half step. Right? So what that consists of is your root, your major second, your major third, your perfect fourth, major sixth, and major seventh in an octave. Again, this E minor chord, even though it has 6 strings, it only has 3 distinct notes. It has the root, the major third, and the perfect fifth, and the octave. But again, going back to the major scale, so it's whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, right? And that includes your root, your major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, and your octave, if you need your octave. Now for the minor chord, the minor scale for E sounds like this. Right? And so the formula for that is whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. And that includes your root, your major second, your minor third, perfect fifth, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor sixth, minor seventh, and octave, right? So for both the minor and major diatonic scales, all you're dealing with is half steps and whole steps. There's something called a harmonic minor scale, which is kind of an exception, and you probably have heard it, being played, but that's an exception because that is consisting of 3 half step interval, but it basically sounds like this. Right, that's a 3 half steps. So the point of the video is it's very important to know what your intervals are. I would say it's just equally as important as knowing all the note names on the fretboard, just so that you know it. And that takes it takes time. You're really not going to get there in like a week or what have you. You're not going to, it's rote memorization is not going to work. Using those stickers are not going to work. But it's just as important to know all the intervals. If you actually want to know what you're doing, that the foundation for any music theory, this is like the first thing you learn in music theory is, okay, so B to C, there's no intervals, and E to F, there's no intervals. First thing you learn is what we just went over. Okay, what is a minor second? What is a major second? What is a major third? What is a minor third? What is a perfect fifth? What is a diminished chord? Now you know all that because, we counted from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way through 12, and there's an interval name for each of those. And that's it. Thanks.